Okay, I think we are going to go on and get started. It is 35 past the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and welcome to the ICSIS webinar, Unlock the Power of Corporate Learning. But before we get started, let's go over a few house rules. So please do keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. And you can enter questions in the chat window. We'll collect those questions and answer them at the end of the webinar. Now, some of you may be anxious about having to take copious notes during this, but don't worry. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll share it with you after the event. You can also reach us at the email address on the screen. Our Twitter handle is @ICSIS, and if you be live tweeting, please do use the hashtag #UnlockLearning. And with that, let's get started. ICSIS has a long history of working with some of the world's most eminent education and learning companies. We've helped organizations that create and distribute content for schools, higher education, and corporate learning to respond to the challenges that they face and to transform the way that they do business. We're going to share with you today some of the latest thinking about what you should be considering for learning and development in the digital age. Hi, my name is Stephen Casbier. I'm a senior publishing consultant at ICSIS, where I work with learning departments to align strategy and business objectives with technology. And joining me today are Ian Singh and Paul Twelftree. Ian, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Ian Singh, and I'm product manager here at ICSIS, and I focus on optimizing our solutions for learning environments. Paul?
My name is Paul Twelftree. I'm the Chief Innovations Officer across the ICSIS Group. I look after our consulting practice. I also look after our product division and our customer success program too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ian and Paul. Today, learning is a business critical priority. It's essential to increase employee skills, upgrade organizational talent, build a leadership pipeline, and to engage employees by providing personal growth opportunities. In this year's Global Human Capital Trends Survey, 85% of the respondents cited learning as important or very important to their organizations, and that's up 21% from last year. But we're facing many issues. Another survey recently found that 66% of learning and development professionals are finding it difficult to get employees to engage, and less than a quarter of line managers think that their learning and development department is critical to achieving their business goals. And only 14% of learning and development leaders believe that they're viewed as strategic business leaders, and fully 52% are viewed as mediocre or worse. Clearly, the performance and perception of learning departments doesn't match the expectations of our organizations. And at the same time, there's a digital explosion happening, and that's driving expectations from learners even higher and higher. More than 400 universities now offer free or low-cost MOOCs, which, as we know, are massive online open courses. And the availability of digital learning tools and video offerings and cloud-based training systems is just increasing dramatically. All of these new learning platforms are really easy to use, and they provide ready access to internal and external content. And they can use analytics to recommend content to learners, a lot like Netflix and YouTube do. Yet while employees are demanding a more personalized digital learning experience that feels like the consumer sites they're using every day, many of us are stuck with learning management systems that are decades old, and they amount to little more than a registration system or a course catalog. We're finding that less than 25% of companies feel comfortable with today's learning environment. In another recent survey, only 6% of the respondents who were learning professionals rated themselves excellent at providing mobile learning. Only 6% rated themselves excellent at incorporating MOOCs into their learning and development programs, and only 5% rated themselves excellent at using rich media, such as video and audio. With organizational demands and learner expectations of our learning departments climbing, it's clearly time to reimagine the learning experience we provide. It's time to revisit our learning content strategy, and it's time to find a way to create an engaging environment for our learners to take advantage in this digital transformation. That's a lot to do. We're going to start doing that in this webinar by discussing some of the biggest challenges facing learning and development departments today, and how we can use advanced learning content management solutions to meet those challenges and to innovate within our organizations. But first, let's define a few terms. Paul, could you help set the stage for this?
Absolutely. There should be a slide. There it is, a slide to kind of begin to explain the three different areas that we divide a learning platform into. So starting at the bottom in that red section, the Learning Content Management System, or the LCMS. This is where we store the assets. Now, those assets could be rich media, they could be textual content or learning objects. This is where those assets are stored. It's a single source. It's the final place for these assets to be. And it might be that there's editorial tools integrated there. There's a place where things can be assembled, and definitely a place where content can be searched for. In the middle there, the yellow section is the LMS, or the Learning Management System. This is where the subscriptions take place, or the course participation, the understanding of where the learner, the consumer is at within the learning process. And likewise, at the top here in the green section, the course presentation, or the player. This is the presentation layer of all the content and the learning. So whether that's a website or a mobile application, or print even. And for the purposes of this webinar, we'll be assuming that you already have in place an LMS, and we'll be focusing on the kind of LCMS and the presentation layer. Thanks, Stephen.
Fabulous. Thank you, Paul. So we'll have some demos in those areas as well coming up very soon. As we already know, the way people want to consume learning content is changing, and that will continue to change. Now, half of today's workforce is part of the millennial generation, and these learners have the same expectation from training platforms as they do other digital platforms. They want content to be available when, how, and where they want it. They expect flexibility in how they interact with learning content. They want fewer full-size courses and more what I'll call learning snacks, delivered as EPUBs or videos or reference tools. And they want less tell and more games and gamification, and less of this PowerPoint-only stuff, and including more cool and interactive tools within the lectures that they're watching and other things they're participating in. They do expect to have social interaction, collaborative learning, and an experience that's personal to them. So how do we address this? By ensuring that our content and delivery methods are flexible, agile, and interoperable. But it's not. As you can see from all of the statistics on this slide, we really aren't developing and delivering content that works to engage learners. And we realize that engagement and retention are essential to create positive learning outcomes and to deliver the value that's expected of us. Part of the engagement problem is a lack of an ability to find content, either by our instructional designers or by learners. And this is the first thing we need to fix. When we develop content and manage it granularly, it future-proofs the content for changing learner demands. It allows us to author once and publish anywhere to any device or any location. And format-agnostic content can be imported into any LMS or transformed into any product, like a web content management system, a PDF, an EPUB, an app, or even a print item. And it also allows content to be personalized, adaptive, and dynamic. When learning content is developed and managed in these small bites, it becomes possible to deliver those bites in a way that's unique to a learner. And by incorporating rich media, social content, and things like wikis and knowledge management capabilities, we can drive up that level of engagement. Ian, can you show us what rich, granular, and engaging content might look like?
Yes, absolutely. What we need to think about is what a targeted piece of learning content is like when it's deployed in the sort of environment that the user wants to engage with it in. So someone, for example, who wants to consume some content on their mobile device, like we see here. And here we've got some very targeted material on a specific aspect of bicycle maintenance, which, as you can see, it's richly illustrated, and you've got some engagingly written content, and you have some interactivity. So you have dynamic illustrations that reinforce learning. So here, if you want to know what a cassette is in the context of a bicycle's gears, you can simply tap on the flipboard and see what it looks like, which all serves to reinforce what the learning is. And then as you go through this, you can go and further reinforce it with interactive quizzes and testing. So as you come to the end of your individual element of learning, you can go and deploy a quiz that monitors progress or gives feedback on the overall learning effectiveness. So a typical user, having consumed this very specific element of content, can go and get some positive reinforcement by checking to see how well they've understood the material that's been delivered here. So I think, in a very quick nutshell, Stephen, we can see here how learning has changed beyond recognition from the era of static, big textbooks, or even the model of deploying a typical ebook-like experience.
Yeah, that does begin to show how content can be more engaging and how we can present more engaging content. But how do we actually go about creating that?
Well, that's a really good question. So what we look at here is a system where what we have found is the need to have a really intuitive editorial environment. So what you need is a nice, accessible, what you see is what you get environment. So where a user or a creator of content can simply key in the sort of material very easily so that they're empowered across the organization to easily create learning that communicates their skills. So if they want to enter descriptive text, they can state that you will need different types of screwdrivers. So let's say both flathead and crosshead screwdrivers, just like you would in a typical word processor. And then equally, if you want to go and drag in some interactivity, like those flashcards that we saw, you should be able to do that very, very straightforwardly, just by dropping it into your working area and going and editing it. So adding in some imagery. So dropping in a picture of a screwdriver and giving some contextual text to make the flipboard work. So here we go, called a flathead screwdriver. And notice here that you're creating some interactivity without needing any coding ability. You're handheld through the whole process, so that what we're doing is breaking down the barriers between the experts who are able to go and provide content and who can go and create the sort of user experience that we're aiming for. So someone can go and very quickly go and create this sort of material and see what it's likely to look like in the user environment before you go off to publish it. So Stephen, as you can see, what we're aiming at is an environment where you can make engaging, bite-sized elements of learning content really, really easy to make.
That's great. So there is a way that we might be able to build an intuitive interface to create engaging content. That is really fantastic. But Ian, I mentioned earlier that the first thing we should address is to make content discoverable. Because if instructional designers and content developers and learners can't even find the learning content that they need, it clearly presents a problem. And today we have loads of content that simply can't be found. And how bad is it? A Deloitte study from earlier this year found that 68% of workers think that the volume of information they have to deal with is simply overwhelming. And that makes it very difficult to keep track of what information is going to be actually useful to them. And 34% said there aren't effective tools like search to help them find anything. This problem we have with content is exacerbated by LMS platforms and presentation platforms that only allow learners to consume content linearly. Learning content is often managed as large monolithic courses or in formats that aren't compatible with each other and that don't allow for reuse of learning objects. And metadata, which is one key element of making learning content discoverable and reusable, is poorly managed, if it's managed at all. So what we find is that we need a way to manage enrichment of learning content. This is going to make it more easy to find. And when we couple that with storing granular learning content, we can combine it into many different forms for delivery to and consumption by learners. Ian, can you show us how we might engage learning content and might enrich it in such a way that we can actually find it?
Absolutely. And as you say, the key to discoverability is enrichment. So associating content with metadata, so you can apply common concepts to it, so information can be grouped and segmented more logically, and adding descriptions to allow people to readily understand what sort of content they're dealing with. So if we look at the item we were working with previously on bicycle tools, we can edit its properties to slot in these additional elements of metadata alongside our document. So we could start to add some tags, for example. So we could say that this document is about cycling. We could say that it's about tools, and we could say that it's about transportation. And we can just add all of these in our interface so that we associate these sorts of tags to it. We can also put a description in. So we could say that it's a simple guide to tools needed for bike maintenance, which allows a human to readily understand in a summary and in a nutshell the sort of content that they're going to be getting in here. And all this provides some underlying assistance to the search engine, which underpins the learning content management system, to enable it to be used in surfacing it for either collating together materials that you can use to build your course, or helping users at the end delivery section find this content, because it's not just about the learning content management system. These tags and descriptions can follow your content into the delivery environment and so be used by learning consumers to find the material they need to train them in what they need at that time.
So you're showing how to add metadata and enrichment, but how do you actually go about finding it?
Okay, so how does this content help you surface the content by using the sort of enrichment that we've placed in here? Working in our content management system, we can see how we can use it to readily identify useful material. And the way we'll start this is let's start with a search. So let's look for some content about bicycles. And this goes off and crawls across all of the material that we're holding in our learning content management system and retrieves material that are about bicycles. The challenge you have there is you will often have a large body of information stored in here. So what we do is we intersect with the metadata that's associated with this material. And this allows us to go and filter and refine the sort of information that we're looking at. We can refine by file type, the people who've created and modified it, and how it's been tagged. So when we're looking at this, the search intersected with the metadata, we're going beyond simple search. We're no longer just finding content that we know exists. We're discovering and unearthing material across our whole database. So here we can go and find some material that's about regulations as well as about bicycles. And we're going to refine that and see that we've got things about US traffic regulations and UK traffic regulations. And we're going to have a quick look at that and say, is this relevant to the sort of material we want to deliver? So we can go and interrogate this, go and find and surface information, and by using this enrichment, you start to go and address some of the challenges you face in making your material discoverable.
So finding content can be made better through metadata and tags, and I presume through full text search too.
Yes, absolutely. You'll recall that I searched for bicycle, and what that has done is that's gone and executed a search across the full text of the documents that we've got, and the metadata, and then we've refined it in the guided search by using the filters that are all driven by the content enrichment.
Okay, that's great. But you know, Ian, one of the most significant challenges that we run into as learning departments is that our content quickly becomes out of date. Most learning content is either designed as a static course or a manual or a set of PowerPoint slides or something else that's not really personalized or adapted to a learner, much less something that's able to be updated easily. So as an example, imagine that there's an update to a company program that requires an update to the training material that's associated with it. How do you update just the learning content that's affected, and how do you deploy that so I can pick it up in my deployment systems and that learners can see it? And what if the content is used in multiple sets of material, like a website or a pamphlet or something else? We usually have to update all of that information many times. And the same problem can be seen during learning content delivery. If our learning content is a single large thing, how do I personalize it to the needs of a single learner? And how can I tell what learning content is actually being used and is being used most effectively? I know we can address this by starting with granular content and then linking the learning content along with other related content. So this allows us to update everything and distribute it across the entire learning platform quickly. It also allows us to deliver the same content using multiple methods and channels without fear of the update madness that often hits our instructional designers. How might we do that in the platform that you're showing, Ian?
Okay, let's take a quick look. So if we go back into our learning content management system, we can see some features that mean that having your content in here and you want to go and handle this updating challenge, we can use these tools to make your life a lot easier. So if you remember, we found some content on highway regulations in the US just recently, and we might want to add that to a course that we've got on how to use bikes. And we do this by linking, which is a great feature which creates a link to this piece of content, which can live in multiple places and then preserves the relationship back to what we can call the definitive version. So what we do is we use our link to element, and we find the course that is relevant to us. So we go into transport training and we find, say, bike maintenance 101, and we create a link out to that course. Now, what we can do is we can track that this is where it's been used. So we can see that it's used in bike maintenance 101, and we can jump over here, and we see that here it is in the course with a little paperclip sort of icon showing that it's linked. And this means that by linking it back to the definitive version, it means that when you update the definitive version and changes are made to the authoritative content, this is automatically propagated through everywhere else it's being used. So you can make sure that all courses that you've got that is using this content are always kept up to date. So if you think about it, when you use your content management system to discover the enriched content and then use linked data to populate your courses, it becomes really easy to update content as new requirements emerge, and you can have that safety net that makes you confident that your content is kept current at all times.
Well, that does begin to address some of the reuse and update problems that instructional designers and others who work with our learning content face on a daily basis. But to make matters worse for them, they're often working in isolation with extremely manual processes. Because it's hard to find learning content, they often don't know what's already available, and they simply recreate it, wasting time and money and making our learning content even more complex than it needs to be. What if we were able to provide our content developers collaborative workspaces where they could actually work together on learning content development? And what if, instead of using Excel or some other manual method to manage work, we had a workflow system that can keep learning content moving through the development process or the update and revision cycles or even in translation. Can we do that in the platform, Ian?
Of course we can, Stephen. So let's go and find some content that we can collaborate on. And we can collaborate on all sorts of content, so text and imagery and rich media content like video too. So here we've got some video of people cycling around London in an urban environment, which we can watch and we can think of different ways that could be used and what sort of lessons we could draw from this and how we could use it to illustrate our material, and then work with colleagues to capture and enhance it and make use of it. Now, to do this, we'll fire up our collaboration tool, which gives you an ability to walk through the video and mark up points where we think the useful material could be found. So let's jump to the first one here. And here we've got a little piece of content that's been highlighted on the video, and there's been a comment made that said, could we use this as an example of traffic signals? What does editorial think? And then the editorial guys have responded that it's a good idea, please go ahead. And we can go and respond to that and correspond with them saying thanks, we'll get right on it. Which then goes and communicates things to people, and we can then, based on that, say that this issue is resolved. So we can start to enable a collaborative workflow through this, all within this application. And equally, you can go and find some other material. So here's an issue where someone points out that they're riding through a red light, and we can again maybe negotiate a little bit on that, because let's give the cyclist a little bit of credit. Maybe it's an amber light, so maybe they aren't breaking the rules of the road. But equally, this gives us an ability to go and spot elements within content that can be used to highlight a whole load of different things. So we could maybe go and draw onto the system to say, this guy's not wearing a helmet, seeing as we're looking at bad cycling habits. And this allows us to start, again, enriching content in a really collaborative way. That means we can start going to say, this is how we can find more ways of making use of this content. And we can collaborate with people, we can assign it to different departments to go and look at, and then ultimately stage it through until the content is approved. So it's all good to go and approve it. And then once we're done with that, we can go back into our system, and again, go and using the linking tool that we used previously, we can go and associate this content with the relevant sort of courses that we think are going to be useful. So here we can see how collaboration is key to creating and enhancing material across the organization. And because it's all stored in our LCMS, we can do that without boundaries and without being constrained by having to be in the same office or having the same idea at the same time as our colleagues. And as collaboration and approval takes place, we can immediately make it available for authorization into a course and then deliver it through our learning player.
That's fantastic. The ability to collaborate like that in real time is something that could be very beneficial. But you mentioned something that raises another issue, and that's you have people working in different offices, or we could have different people working in different offices. And we're finding ourselves in a world of increasing globalization, and that translates directly into demands on our learning content. We have content that has to be localized and translated and into any sort of thing. So, for example, a master copy of learning content might need to be modified so that it's applicable to a region. What often happens today is that association between the master content and the regional content is lost. So when the master content changes, the regions are not automatically notified of the change. And it's impossible to track where localizations have been made and where they're used. Wouldn't it be nice if we could keep track of different versions or renditions of learning content so that it could be truly traced and reused regionally. And wouldn't it be nice if we could improve the efficiency of distributing content globally and realize the productivity gains of automating notifications and the workflow of developing regionally relevant learning content as another aspect of personalizing the learning experience? By taking a platform approach to learning content management, we can achieve that. We can manage the overall process of developing learning content, localizing it, organizing it into meaningful learning snacks like I spoke about earlier, and distributing it to learners when, where, and how they want it. Ian, can you show us one way to manage a localization in this platform?
Yes, absolutely. So, making a regionally specific version of a course is made a lot easier with our learning content management system. Content can be reused very easily without the need for copy typing it, or as Stephen said, making multiple different versions that could get out of sync or end up contradicting each other. Now, the way that we suggest doing that is we'll go into our course builder, where we've got the library of all the various different courses that we've set up. And let's look at our transportation training suite. Now, we've focused largely on building something which had some US rules of the road in there. But let's say we want to go and create a version for our staff in the UK and cope with the regional differences that are there. Now, some material will be similar or identical because the fundamentals of assembling a bike are pretty much exactly the same, whichever side of the Atlantic you're on. Equally, the details of precise ways about keeping your bike running smoothly on a day-to-day basis will be pretty much the same. And the video that we used and the imagery that we might want to use to illustrate it may be very similar because a picture of a bicycle cassette will be, again, pretty much the same. So what we can do here is we can reuse these, again, by putting them into the course and finding our UK course. So we'll go to biking in the UK and link this material across. And what we can do is we go into biking in the UK and we can see that we now have some additional material in here. So we've got the stuff on assembly, we've got the details, we've got the images, and we've got our cycling video. And let's say we want to go and add the content about the UK traffic regulations because they are different to the US, and at least they cycle on the different side of the road. So let's go and look for law that's related to cycling, and we can find, again, here are our traffic regulations UK content. And we'll go in here and confirm that it's fit for purpose and it's the right sort of material that we want. We quickly eyeball that and we can see that it talks about all sorts of good stuff, including traffic lights like we talked about earlier. So again, we'll go and link this through to our UK bike course. So in we go into biking in the UK and link it through, and through it goes. And we can see that it's used in biking in the UK. And we'll just go to that course, and go to the root of it. And what we can do is we can go and do a little check to make sure that it's in the right order and in the right sequence, so that the learning journey that the end user of this will have remains logical. And we can do basic things like saying, you know what, we should probably put the course introduction ahead of the traffic regulations because that's going to be a more logical way of doing it. So we can think about a way in which we can guide the user through the sort of learning experience that they want to have that's going to be logical and intuitive for them. And then once we've done that, we can go and start looking at that in our composition view. So if we go into the layout tool that we looked at earlier, we can go and look at biking in the UK. And we can see how it's laid out. And we can see we've got a content in here that's about the highway code. And what we can also do is go and say, well, the stuff here about traffic lights, well, that video we had was really useful about highlighting traffic lights, especially that it's important to go and pay attention to traffic lights and that amber signals are important. So we just pick up the video bit of interactivity, drop it in and choose our video from the library, select it, and in comes the video. And it's loaded up, and here it's all ready to go. And we can go and have a look and say this is all in the right sort of order. We think it looks as though it's going to be good. So it's all ready to be published out to our end user. So let's go and see what that would look like for an end user. And we can go back to the typical environment that we talked about earlier. So deploying this onto a mobile device. And you can see it rendered here on my Android phone. And I can go into the section on the UK Highway Code. And I can see that the material is here. And scroll down and see that we've got material here that we talked about. We've got our traffic light video, and it's already there to be played for the user. So we can see how we can go and start to embed all this sort of material in. We can assemble things together, build in a regionalized piece of content that's capitalizing on all the material we've got, living in our learning content management system, and deliver it very, very easily and straightforwardly.
That's fantastic, Ian. Thank you. You've actually shown us how to begin addressing some of the biggest challenges facing us today, and how we can move from a world where learning content is static, discrete, unable to be reused, and authored by people working in isolation, and where learners are disengaged with low retention rates, to a world where we've liberated learning by making learning content development a collaborative activity, by making content dynamic and agile so it can be reused and repackaged for different situations, and where learning is personalized and adaptive and engaging. It's definitely an exciting time to be involved in corporate learning. And today we've looked briefly at what's happening across the learning industry and how to think about and to begin addressing some of the challenges that we're facing. But exactly what makes sense for you and your company is unique to you and your company. So let's continue the conversation and talk about your specific challenges and how ITSIS might be able to help you achieve your learning and learning content goals. And at this point, I was going to see if we had any questions from the audience that are being sent over to me. Here's one. Ian, I think this is going to be for you. You showed adding metadata and tags manually. Is there a way to automate that?
Interesting and very topical. We certainly showed the tags being added by human, and editor making choices, and often that's how organizations will want to work. But equally, when organizations are faced with very large data sets, or they want to impose consistency, they want to use a machine-assisted way of doing things. And we've certainly done this a lot of times, integrating in with a variety of different semantic tool sets to be able to impose rules that automatically categorize information as it comes into the system based on the controlled vocabulary that's set up for an organization. And in a lot of cases, that can prove very, very powerful. So certainly that's something that we'd accommodate, and we'd relish going and talking to organizations that want to go down that route.
Thank you. Thanks. There's another one that was just sent over. Again, I think for you, Ian, you talked about making content easier to find and surface for authors and instructional designers. How does this impact at the user or the learner end?
Okay. I think the crux of this is the core point that when you enrich content and you move it around from your learning content management system into your learning management system or into your course player, the metadata that you've associated with it travels with it. So the enrichment that you've done is never lost. So in exactly the same way as we showed a course assembler making use of the enrichment to have a guided searching experience, you can deploy that into the hands of the users. So in the same way as a user might start out by saying, well, I'm interested in what training is there available for bicycling, but then have the availability of additional information about regulations exposed to them. That allows them to surface and discover things that maybe they didn't know exist and really hone in on the training that's most relevant to them.
Okay. That makes sense. Makes sense to me. And we have one that, Paul, may be appropriate for you to answer. It says we have an LMS currently in our organization, and how does that work within the environment that you're showing?
Yeah, okay. So at the beginning, I explained the 3 different areas, segments of a learning platform. The LCMS, where the content is stored, the presentation, the player, where the consumer or the learner is interacting with the content, and then the LMS. And as you say, if you've already got an LMS, how does that fit in? I think the best way to explain that is that the LMS is used to track the learner's progress through the content. So the content is being referenced by the LMS, and the user is being tracked by the LMS. There's a separation of concerns of those 3 systems, which is quite important. It means that you can begin to service different types of content, even in an automated way. So as Ian said, as you begin to automate the enrichment of content, you could, for instance, surface content that might have been part of user documentation, let's say, but it's relevant. It's been through an approval process in the LCMS. It gets indicated through the LMS that a user might want to see this, and then it can be presented to them in the presentation layer. So there's a lot of different ways that LMS can be integrated, but certainly work that we've done before.
Oh, I had muted myself. Thank you, Paul.
No
that
problem.
was good. That's fine. Excuse me. There is one question, Paul, that was popped in here. Popped in. I see that on the Everyone chat. It says, I want my authors to use a particular structure when they develop content, and I don't see any way to set up structured authoring templates.
Yeah, no problem. So that wasn't an area that we showed in this demonstration, but there's certainly a way to set up those templates, those structures, and whether that's through some kind of ontology integration or whether you might want to think of it as a folder structure that you enforce on people, and whether that's just a structure. And Ian showed a bit of demonstration of dragging content up and down through a structure. That could be enforced. It could also be that part of that structure is enforcing the type of content that goes into that structure too. So within an introduction section, you can only put textual content. Within a media section, you can only put video. So there's ways of enforcing that as well. And it's completely flexible of what that structure would be as well. But yes, certainly possible to do.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm not sure. Let me see if we have any other questions coming through. I think that's the last one that was passed to me. If there are other questions that you have, or perhaps it did not get passed on to me, then we will respond to those privately. We'll respond to those directly to you. As we said early on, there's also going to be a recording of this and slides prepared and sent to you. So at this time, I think that's the end of the webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining and participating, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you so much.